All right. So, prepping for this MBE section of the bar exam, it can feel like you're drowning in material, trying to remember everything. And sometimes it feels like just hitting the books isn't quite enough. And that's kind of what we're diving into today, right? This idea that you can actually use intuition, kind of unlock this other side of your brain to really conquer the MBE. We've got an expert with us today who swears by this. And believe me, this is not your typical, like, just go with your gut advice.
Yeah, I think that's right, to be a little skeptical. You know, there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, about what it means to learn intuitively,
Yeah.
especially with something like the MBE that's so technical. But let's just clear the air right away. This isn't about just magically knowing the answer,
Yeah.
or, kind of like a process of elimination where you're just crossing things off and hoping you're left with the right one.
Okay, so no frantically, like going through A, B, C, D and crossing them off, hoping that something sticks.
Exactly. Yeah, no, not at all. We're really talking about something much more interesting here. It's really about tapping into this, I imagine like a reservoir of legal knowledge that you've been building this whole time and figuring out a way to access that, even under pressure.
Okay, color me intrigued, but for those of us out there who, really thrive on structure, break it down for us. How does this actually work when you're in the middle of the MBE?
Well, you might be surprised to hear how straightforward it can be. First, you read the question carefully. You want to absorb all the details. What's the issue here? And then instead of diving into like overanalyzing every single word, just read through the answer choices without overthinking it. And this is the important part. Just let yourself gravitate towards an answer.
Yeah.
Whatever that first pull is, whatever that feeling is, that's what we're working on.
I mean, I can already hear some of our listeners saying, wait a minute, isn't that just glorified guessing?
Yeah, and then that's a very valid concern. It's really important to understand that this is not about randomly picking something and hoping for the best. This is about training your intuition to be like a finely tuned instrument.
So there's more to it than just that initial feeling.
Absolutely.
Oh.
It really hinges on trusting those whispers from your subconscious mind. This part of you that's been absorbing information all along, even if you don't realize it.
Oh, now you've really piqued my curiosity.
Yeah.
Can you paint us a picture here? Like, how does this actually play out when you're in the heat of the MBE?
Okay, so let's say you're facing a contracts question, right? Something about offer and acceptance. Instead of immediately going into like dissect every word and trying to find the perfect rule, just take a breath and ask yourself, like, what's the core issue here? What feels like a fair and reasonable outcome based on what I'm reading? You might actually be surprised to find that your intuition kind of points you in the right direction, even before your brain has time to really think about it too much.
Okay, that makes sense for certain situations. But what about those curveball questions? The ones where you're reading it and nothing seems familiar? What happens when that initial spark just doesn't come?
Well, that's where the selective part of selective intuition comes in. It's about being able to tell the difference between a hunch that's strong and trustworthy versus when you need to pause and really engage in that more, deliberate thought process.
Yeah, so it's not really an either or. It's about knowing when to use which approach. But how do we develop that awareness? How do we learn to trust those gut feelings, especially in an environment as intense as the bar exam?
It's like you're training a muscle.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just walk into a gym and try to bench press your body weight without any practice. And it's the same with intuition. You can't expect it to be exam ready if you haven't given it a proper workout.
Okay, so how do we train this intuition muscle? What kind of mental gym membership do I need for this?
Well, it's actually simpler than you might think. But it does require you to kind of shift your mindset. Remember all those MBE practice questions that you've been diligently working through? Instead of approaching those with the goal of like, I have to get every single one right, what if you use those as a way to actually train your intuition?
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So you read through the question, and then before you even look at the answer choices, just pause for a second, close your eyes just for a beat, and just see what comes up for you. Don't overthink it. Don't try to force anything. Just let yourself be drawn to a particular answer or a concept. Then open your eyes and see if any of the choices kind of align with that initial feeling.
So it's like I'm treating these practice sessions as like a low-stakes experiment in trusting my gut.
Exactly. And the more you practice this way, the more you'll start to notice these like subtle signals that your intuition sends you. You'll start to see the difference between like a random guess and an informed instinct based on what you already know.
It's like this whole other layer of processing that I wasn't even aware of before.
That's it. And that's where the selective part really comes in. As you practice, you'll get better at sensing when your intuition is really strong versus when you need to, kind of switch gears and maybe engage your analytical mind a little more.
This reminds me of something you were talking about earlier about that feeling of being overwhelmed during the exam. Like we're stuck in this noisy room and we can't even hear ourselves think, let alone those intuitive whispers.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. The bar exam is notorious for amping up our anxieties and
Mhm.
sending our minds into overdrive. And that's exactly why it's so important to have a system for calming that mental noise
Yeah.
so that your intuition can actually come through.
Right. Like we need to swap out that mental clutter for some peace and quiet. But how do we actually do that in a high pressure situation like that?
You know what? Honestly, mindful breathing can be a game changer during the MBE. Even if you just take a few conscious breaths between questions, it's going to help you lower your heart rate, clear your head, and create that space for those insights to come through.
So it's like hitting the reset button between questions. Give ourselves a mini meditation to combat that overload.
Exactly. And the best part is it's so easy to do and nobody even has to know.
Mm.
It's like your secret weapon against that exam stress.
I can see how that would be helpful, but I have to imagine that this whole trusting your gut thing isn't easy for everyone. What about those of us who are like naturally analytical? You know, we love logic, we love structure. It almost feels like we're being asked to abandon those strengths.
That's a really good point. And I want to reassure everyone that this isn't about abandoning your analytical mind at all. It's not an either-or situation. Think of it more like adding another powerful tool to your arsenal.
So it's not about replacing logic and analysis, it's finding a way for them to work together with intuition.
Exactly. It's about harnessing the power of both. You still need your analytical mind to understand those legal rules, analyze the facts, and build your arguments. But when you invite your intuition to the table, you're tapping into this incredible source of knowledge and insight. And it can often lead you to the answer more quickly and effortlessly.
So we're talking about a complete paradigm shift here in how we think about the MBE. It's not just about brute force memorization and endless analysis. It's about trusting our instincts, quieting that mental noise, and allowing these aha moments to guide us. It almost sounds too good to be true, but I have to admit, I'm starting to see the potential.
And remember, this isn't just some, new age untested theory or anything. This is rooted in actual science, in how our brains work. Learning isn't just about storing information in these neat little boxes. We're creating these complex neural networks that operate on both conscious and unconscious levels.
So when we talk about intuition, we're really talking about tapping into the power of those subconscious networks.
Exactly. Our brains are constantly processing information, making connections and forming insights, even when we're not consciously aware of it. Selective intuition is just a way to access that hidden wisdom and actually use it to our advantage. It's about trusting that all those years of legal study have actually wired your brain for this, even if you don't always see the connections right away.
That's like that saying, you don't know what you know until you need to know it. It's like we've crammed all this information into our heads. And now this is about figuring out how to unlock it in a way that's more intuitive and efficient.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about shifting from this place of doubt and insecurity to one of confidence and trust in your own abilities.
So how do we actually make that shift? How do we go from feeling overwhelmed and intimidated by the MBE to approaching it with that sense of empowered intuition? What are those practical steps we can take? So it's really about giving ourselves permission to kind of step away from that need to overanalyze everything and actually cultivate a sense of trust in our own judgment. But how do we actually make that happen?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that the bar exam, as challenging as it is not designed to be this impossible feat.
Yeah.
You've put in the work, you've spent years honing these skills
Mm.
and absorbing so much information. The key is to trust those foundations.
So it's like a shift in perspective from I need to know absolutely everything to, okay, I've got this, I'm prepared, and I can trust my instincts.
That's it. And remember, intuition isn't some mystical force or anything. It really is a product of all that experience and knowledge that you've built up. Every practice question, every case you've analyzed, every late night study session, it's all contributed to building this incredible database inside of you.
So in a way, by preparing for the bar, we've already been unknowingly training our intuition all along.
Exactly. And now it's just about consciously tapping into that wellspring of knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and trusting it to guide you. Think of it like switching from driving a manual car to an automatic.
Yeah.
You're not suddenly forgetting how to drive. You're just allowing the system to work a little bit smoother and more efficiently.
This whole conversation makes me think about the pressure we put on ourselves, especially with an exam as big as the bar. Like we have to
Yeah,
have
sure.
every single answer perfectly memorized and lined up. And if we don't, it's like a sign of failure.
Yeah, that's such a common experience. But that kind of perfectionism can really hold us back,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to intuition. The more we try to force an answer or overthink every single possibility, the more we actually drown out those subtle but really powerful whispers of insight.
So it's not about silencing our inner critic completely. It's about like finding a way to coexist with it.
Exactly. It's like telling that inner critic to maybe take a back seat for a little bit.
Yeah.
While your intuition takes the wheel, you're not abandoning logic and reason completely. You're just expanding your toolkit to include this more holistic and intuitive approach.
It's almost like we're learning to dance with the uncertainty of the exam a little bit and trusting that we do have the skills and the knowledge to navigate those challenging moments without panicking or resorting to just brute force memorization.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance
Right.
between being prepared and trusting yourself.
Yeah.
And every time you sit down to do a practice question with this mindset, you're strengthening that connection,
Yeah.
building that confidence, and
Yeah.
really setting yourself up for success on exam day.
This has been so insightful. I really appreciate it. But I know some of our listeners might still be thinking, okay, what if I try this and it doesn't work? What if I just end up second guessing myself or feeling like I'm just making things up as I go?
That's completely understandable. It's new, it's different. Developing any new skill takes time and practice. It might feel a little awkward at first, but the more you do it, the more natural it will become.
So be patient.
Yeah.
Trust the process.
Exactly. And even if you don't get every single question right using this approach, the very act of tapping into your intuition can make the whole MBE experience so much less stressful. Who knows, you might even surprise yourself with how accurate your instincts can be.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about, for sure. It's like we've been given permission to approach the MBE with a whole new level of confidence and trust in ourselves. So if those traditional study methods have been leaving you feeling overwhelmed or just completely burned out, maybe it's time to give this a try. You might just be amazed by the results.